Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Finovate podcast. This is Greg Palmer. This week, we're going to have two episodes which are talking about women in fintech specifically and diversity in fintech more generally. Our first episode is with Theo Lau of Unconventional Ventures. It ran a little bit longer than I had intended to, but I think it's worth it. In the interest of time, let's go ahead and jump straight into the interview with her. Joining me today on the podcast is Theo Lau of Unconventional Ventures. You've probably seen her or heard of her at some point, but if you haven't, Theo is a very well-respected voice in the industry, someone who I've known for quite a while. And Theo, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So for anybody who hasn't heard of you before, can you just tell us what Unconventional Ventures is and give a little bit of a background of your history?
Yes, definitely. So unlike most people in this space, I did not come from a bank. I've done a lot of work in technology and work with startups for quite a bit, sourcing startups, looking at what they're presenting, what do they have to offer, and finding them partners to work on. So one of the things that we do believe in Conventional Ventures, which drive everything that we say and do and write about it, everyone should have a chance to try and be successful regardless of where they come from, their gender, sex, age, or social economics background. And so that's what we believe in.
It's a simple enough premise, but I'm sure you would agree that it's very difficult to kind of make that a reality. And that actually brings us to the topic of our chat today. We wanted to talk specifically about kind of gender in fintech and some of the ways that gender inequality is holding the industry back and what we can do about it. So, I think most people who are paying attention understand that we're a long way from gender equality in fintech. But Theo, can you tell us, what are the metrics that you look at when you think about how bad the problem really is?
I would say how challenging it is. It's how I would term it. Visually is really easy. You go around fintech conferences and you see how many people that are women or minority that are actually speaking on stage versus how many of them are, on the floor in the audience, or just take a look on social media. All of the various lists that we have, the list of influencers and whatnot, and where women are and how many of them. Most recently, the Forbes have a top 100 innovators. 1 out of 100 is a woman. On HBR, the top 100 CEOs, 4 out of 100 are women. And they celebrated the fact that we have 4 because last year there were 3. The year before we had 2.
Hey, progress is progress, I guess.
It's progress, right? Time Person of the Year, Greta, is the only 5th woman in the last 90 years of history to be on there. So that's pretty obvious, I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's something certainly we see at Finovate. We've always kind of noticed it, to your point, when you've got a large group of people in fintech in the same space, you can just kind of look around the room and see. So, one of the challenges I think a lot of people have is that, a lot of people are in agreement that something's got to change, but it's difficult to think of specific examples of actions that individuals can take. Is there something you'd recommend for people who are in that situation where they're looking around at a conference and seeing, this isn't right, we should be doing more here? What can those people do as a first step?
As a first step, I'll say talk to people, right? Typically, you would say if you keep reaching into the same little black book, you'll have the exact same audience every single time. If you reach to the same pool, you'll have the same ideas. So go find someone that don't look like you, that's not from your same background. Just talk to them. And next thing you know, one person will lead to 10. Each one of them will bring in additional fresh ideas. That's why we also stress about diversity in hiring, diversity in boards, diversity in leaders. Is all of those different people from different backgrounds, different gender, different sex, different ways they grew up with, different education, if you will. They bring in different perspectives, and that's how we can flourish as an ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of a really an unspoken piece of what you're just saying there, which is, as you talk to those groups, also make sure that you listen, right? Collect their stories, collect their experiences, and really start to understand where they're coming from. And that's one of the things that we've seen as well, is we've given women a chance to get up on stage, or people with diverse backgrounds a chance to get up on stage and tell their story. They have very unique things that they can share that other people in the space aren't talking about. And I think that's where there's really an opportunity to grow and to do something good. So, I guess let's take a step back, because up until this point, we've been kind of taking it as a given that a more inclusive fintech ecosystem is better. I think that there are people who, they wouldn't say it loudly, but I think there are people who would disagree with that, and think, that it's fine and that you don't need to do that. But let's just engage with that kind of straw man a little bit. What advantages do you think there are for the industry and the individuals who are looking to drive change? What's really in it for them? Is there a carrot here instead of just a stick?
I would say it goes both ways, right? Two sides of the same coin. But before we do that, though, I would agree with you. There are lots of people who would disagree, and they are actually very verbal about it. Just take a look at all my direct messages and LinkedIn emails. One of these days, I'll share that with you. It's actually quite scary.
Yeah, let's open it up.
But to your point, there are obviously a lot of advantages. This is not just something that is good to do, but it's also good for businesses, right? Because it brings in different ways of thinking and approaching an idea. There are many ways, of all the fintech startups that we work with, they have a specific problem they're trying to solve. But when you bring in everyone that thinks exactly the same, chances are the approach to how we go about solving the problem would be very unilateral. Whereas when you bring in different people from different perspectives, perhaps they have different cultural consideration that they have in there, or different aspects of looking at different things. And that's what diversity brings.
For sure. Well, and I think one of the other pieces that we hear a lot about is there's sort of this general recognition that in a huge number of households, the woman in the household is kind of the primary financial caretaker of the family, right? The CFO of the family, if you will. And we've seen this knowledge that this is the case, but not very many people have engaged with that. And when companies have engaged with that, I think LearnVest is a great example of a company who really reached out towards that market, and they've been very successful. So there is an opportunity here, and it's certainly not localized to the United States. This is, I think, to one of your earlier points, something that you can look at from all over the world. It's not just gender that is the only difference, but the more you can reach out to those different groups and get those perspectives, the more likely you are to find that really big opportunity.
Absolutely, because we don't innovate in a vacuum, right? So when you have an audience and the audience is diverse, then your team makeup needs to reflect that. And that's how you can actually address a problem. So according to the World Economic Forum, the latest report, they say the economic gender gap will take 257 years to close, as opposed to 202 years as they predicted last year. So let's do what we can to close that gap and make it shorter.
Man, what happened in the last year? We moved backwards 55 years in 1 year? What happened?
Apparently so. I think there's a lot of, which is where I think Finovate and all the other tech conferences can help, is a large part of that is because the high-tech emerging technology areas, they have an even larger inequality problem than the rest of the quote-unquote women-focused technologies. And so that's where we lose. So we need more inclusive policy, both private and public sectors, to be able to not just recruit women, but retain them. And I think that's the only way forward. We can't just keep hiring people, which is hard, and then keep losing them because we don't have the right policy to retain them.
Yeah. Well, and certainly there are a huge number of factors that play into that. I mean, it starts all the way in early childhood education, where there are sort of different tracks for boys and girls at the age of 8. And, boys are sort of steered in many cases towards math and sciences, and girls aren't. And then that, continues to evolve. And so you start to see people working on that problem, people who are looking at that age, really trying to create more female engineers from, just by educating them at an early stage. But obviously there's still quite a bit of work left to do. And that is not something which is going to 257 years is not going to be fixed by one classroom making one adjustment. But I think one of the pieces that we and we're coming up on the end of our time here, but this is obviously a much bigger topic than we can really do justice to in the context of a short form podcast like this. Are there resources out there that you'd point people towards if someone's interested in diving in more deeply, even just to learn more about what they can do, or actually kind of take some steps to be a part of the change?
Yes, absolutely. I would say start with social media. Between LinkedIn and Twitter, if you just look for women in technology or women in fintech, there are a lot of amazing leaders out there in various different sectors, from artificial intelligence to like payments sector, or to things around like blockchain. All of the emerging technologies, as well as traditional financial services sectors. There are a lot of interesting voices out there. So just start paying attention to who's out there, who's speaking, and what they have to share.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really important one. And I'll also just add in from my standpoint, one of the most important things you can do is, if you are a white male in the space and you see other white males acting badly, call them on it. Don't let it slide. And I think this is something that is, again, it's a small change, but to your point, you've got a mailbox full of messages, and people who are sending those messages need to be called to account. And so I think this is one of those areas where a lot of us can step up and be just witnesses and say, that's not right. You don't treat people that way. You don't say those types of things to people. So, obviously that's not going to be the end all be all, but I think that's another really important first step for a lot of people to take as well.
Absolutely. And don't stop at tokenism, right? Don't pat your back and say, oh, wait a minute, I have one woman in here in a sea of 50 and I did my job. No, you do your job when we all get to parity, when everyone have a chance to speak up. That's when we do our job.
Yeah. I mean, well said. And I think that's a great note to end on, because this is a real problem, and it is one that is going to require real effort to fix. And there are some significant opportunities that are out there for companies who are able to do this and engage with this problem and really become a part of the change. We've seen that over the course of the last 5 or 10 years in fintech. Obviously, it hasn't been enough, but it is still the case that there's a lot of work to be done, and there are good things that can happen for all of us if we do it.
Absolutely. And it'll take all of us, right? This is not a women problem. It's a societal challenge. And we all need to step up and address that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Theo, thank you so much for taking your time to be on the podcast. I'm sure we will continue to have these conversations as we go forward. It's really great to get your perspective and to be able to help amplify your voice. Not that you need it, of course. Your voice is amplified in any number of ways in any number of media, but it's still great to have you on the Finovate podcast. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
I really enjoyed that conversation with Theo. There were a lot of good pieces there to pull out of it. This actually came about because of a conversation that Theo and I had at Finovate Fall back in September in New York. And we were discussing some of the problems in the industry. And I think that I realized this was a productive thing for us to talk about. So hopefully you pulled something engaging out of that conversation. Hopefully there are some tips there that will help guide you if you do want to become a part of the solution to the problem. We will be following this episode up with a second episode this week where I'll be talking to Adela Knox, who is on the Finovate team and leads our speaker recruitment. So we'll talk a little bit about how we view this at Finovate, what we perceive our challenges to be, and just kind of lift the curtain a little bit on how we look at things. So stay tuned for that. That will be there in a couple days. As always, don't forget to use the discount code Finovate Podcast when you register for any of our future events. Finovate Europe is coming up in just a couple weeks in Berlin, and then we'll be moving to Finovate Spring in San Francisco. Finovate Asia is going to be switching a little earlier this year, looking like June or July for that one. And then we'll be returning to New York for Finovate Fall 2020 in September. As always, thank you for listening.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@Finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.